Tonight, the hot seat. Attorney General Merrick Garland's first grilling in the new Congress. Plus,
we cannot ever let that happen again.
Virginia's anti-Semitism task force and an artificial sermon.
It requires us to let go of our ego, to be willing to be vulnerable.
From artificial intelligence, new AI now generating intense controversy. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Attorney General Merrick Garland faces a congressional grilling. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, new questions from the new Congress. The Attorney General facing senators on the Hill today in a hearing over multiple topics, from border security to how to handle domestic terrorists. But a large portion of the testimony was devoted to what some senators view as a blatant disparity in how pro-life and pro-choice groups are being prosecuted for their beliefs. CBN News Capitol correspondent Matt Galka monitored the hearing and joins us with our top story. Matt?
Well, Jenna, a lot has happened in the year since Merrick Garland last faced the Senate Judiciary Committee. But many senators today wanted to know why there seemed to be so many more charges brought against pro-life Americans. A large portion of the hearing had to do with attacks on pro-life centers in the wake of the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision last year. Utah Senator Mike Lee asked Garland about the disparity in justice. 34 people were charged for blocking access to abortion clinics last year, while only 2 people have been charged in the hundreds of attacks on crisis pregnancy centers and churches across the country.
So how do you explain this disparity by reference to anything other than politicization of what's happening there?
Those who are attacking the pregnancy resources centers, which is a horrid thing to do, are doing this at night in the dark. We have put full resources on this.
Multiple senators turned up the heat when they asked Garland about Mark Houck. The Catholic pro-life advocate recently beat a federal case after being arrested in an armed FBI raid at his home in Pennsylvania in front of his wife and kids last fall.
Why do you send 24 agents in body armor to arrest a sidewalk counselor who happens to be pro-life, but you don't devote resources to prosecute people who are violently firebombing crisis pregnancies?
It is a priority of the department to prosecute and investigate and find the people who are doing those firebombings.
Are you telling me that in your opinion as Attorney General, it was objectively necessary to use 20 or 30 SWAT-style agents with long guns and ballistic shields for these people?
What I'm saying is that decisions about how to go about this were made on the ground by FBI agents.
So you're saying you don't know?
I'm saying what I just said.
Which is that you're abdicating responsibility?
I'm not abdicating responsibility.
Then give me the answer.
Houck tells CBN that he wants to hold the agencies accountable for what happened to him.
We need people to know that we were innocent of everything that happened, and that now we want to pursue justice.
Garland also faced questions about an FBI memo from this year allegedly targeting traditionalist Catholics. Garland called the memo appalling and said the FBI is not targeting Catholics. Jenna?
All right, thank you, Matt. Meanwhile, the U.S. is seeing a rise in anti-Semitic violence, and one state is fighting back against hate. Virginia, now the first place to create a task force to investigate incidents and educate the public to prevent anti-Semitism. National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke sat down with Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares and brings us this story.
The Jewish community faces a greater rise in hate than any other religious group in the U.S. With that in mind, officials here in Virginia's capital are taking the lead in growing efforts to fight anti-Semitism.
If you come in and you decide to commit acts of violence or violate anyone's civil rights, you're going to be hearing from the Office of the Attorney General in Virginia very shortly.
Earlier this month, Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares announced the creation of a new task force to monitor and combat anti-Semitism.
We want the left hand to know what the right hand is doing. So it's both monitoring, it's informing, and we have a civil rights division here in the AG's office, if need be, bringing cases as well. So I think that's a critical component, is bringing those both in the law enforcement, the security, the education background on one page. They can get a clear picture of the depths of the problem that we're seeing right now in Virginia, and we're obviously seeing this nationally as well.
A 2021 report by the Anti-Defamation League found that anti-Semitic incidents, including assaults, harassment, and vandalism, hit an all-time high. Virginia experienced a 70% increase in the hate crime.
think we're still dealing with the aftershocks of what happened in Charlottesville in 2017, where you saw the anti-Semitic bigots walking through town, shouting anti-Semitic slurs. And I think, candidly, getting through COVID, we're at this inflection point in America where 50% of Americans don't even know the name of their neighbor.
Samuel Asher, executive director of the Virginia Holocaust Museum, sees ignorance as one of the main factors behind many incidents.
There was a study a couple of years ago by the Schoen Foundation, and it found that if you had been to a Holocaust museum, if you studied about the Holocaust, you were far less likely to be involved in hate groups, white supremacist groups, etc. They also found the reverse. If you had no understanding of the Holocaust, then you are possibly going to be recruited by white supremacists, KKK, etc.
Asher and his staff regularly bring in teachers from all over the state and provide tools to help them accurately teach students about Hitler's final solution aimed at eradicating the Jewish people. With education as a top priority of the new anti-Semitism task force, the museum will also be hosting members of Virginia law enforcement.
The best way to fight bad information is with good information. So a lot of it's educating. A lot of it's making sure our state police officers go and they spend the day when they're at the police academy going to the Holocaust Museum. Because so many young police officers, they're just not familiar with it. And maybe that's an indictment on our history standards in our public schools.
A 50-state survey on Holocaust knowledge among millennials and Gen Z found that 63% didn't know the Holocaust led to the murder of 6 million Jews. 48% couldn't name a single concentration camp.
My family lost 75 members. They came from Plock, Poland, which is a little town outside of Warsaw, and they were sent to the camps. And they're not here now. So I can testify, they're not here. And they're not here because they were killed in the Germans' mechanized killing machine. And we cannot ever let that happen again.
Members of this task force are still being chosen, but Miares tells me he's seeking a mix of public officials and private citizens. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Richmond, Virginia. A Christian college is asking the Supreme Court to take up a case on gender identity and dorms. A Biden administration directive would force the school to allow members of the opposite sex to share dorms rooms depending on a student's gender identity. And now Missouri's College of the Ozarks is fighting back. Attorneys for the Christian college argue the directive would violate biblical principles and traditional Christian beliefs regarding sex and marriage. The move comes after an appeals court ruling against the school. And here with us now is Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, welcome. Good to have you on tonight. So let's start with this case involving College of the Ozarks and gender identity. What kind of implications are there for college women in a case like this?
Well, there's a significant ramifications for the women when it comes to privacy. But look, this is an issue, a First Amendment issue for a religious institution. Now, the ruling against them was based on standing. They're being preemptive in this, and this is one of those cases where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially when it comes to the First Amendment for a religious institution and, as you pointed out, the privacy of women. So I applaud them for standing up and fighting back against this evil ideology being pushed by this administration. In fact, every American should not be silent, but speaking up, pushing back and saying, we're not going to have any of this. So I applaud the leadership there at the College of the Ozarks.
Tonight, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and fellow House Republicans are unveiling the GOP's Parents' Bill of Rights. Tony, your thoughts on that and what it means for parents?
It's a great bill, and this shows you that the Republicans in this 118th Congress are listening to the American people. I mean, the world is upside down when parents who care about the well-being of their children are called terrorists, and those who terrorize them with this ideology that they can choose their gender are called experts. So this is long overdue. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see what the other side of the aisle does with this measure that simply empowers parents, creates transparency in education, making sure that the parents who pay for the schools have an understanding of what their children are being taught and have a voice in the process. I'm excited about the bill. Julie Letlow of Louisiana is the author of the bill. She's going to be carrying it, and I'm hopeful that this will even spur activity at the state level across the country to respect the rights of parents to be involved in the education of their children.
Tony, let's talk about the Equal Rights Amendment while we have you here. Critics say it could be used to strike down pro-life laws, promote public funding for abortion, and really impinge on religious freedom. The Senate, they held a hearing yesterday discussing ways to fast-track the ERA. Does it have a chance of passing this Congress? What do you think?
Look, this is a 50-year-old idea that time has passed. Look, women have equal access. That right has been protected. We see it in credit. We see it in education. We see it in the workplace. But, you know, ironically, where women don't have the protection is to womanhood. We see the left now wanting to treat men and women as if they were interchangeable constructs, when in fact they're biological realities, and they carry great spiritual truths along with them. So I think the ERA is a bad idea. It's more of a smokescreen for the left to push their radical ideology. And if you really dig down on it, you see that the left will not protect womanhood. If they did, they wouldn't be pushing all of this transgender ideology.
All right, Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council. Thank you, Tony. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Overwhelming devastation coming up as earthquake victims in Turkey put the pieces of their lives back together. Operation Blessing is on hand. At least 36 people are dead after a collision between a passenger train and a freight train in Greece. And a railroad worker tonight now under arrest as authorities investigate the crash. Meanwhile, Greece's transportation minister resigned today as rescue workers search for survivors. At the time of the crash, the passenger train was carrying more than 350 people. The cause of the crash is still unknown, but as he resigned, the former transportation minister said Greece's rail system is not up to 21st century standards. In Turkey, as earthquake victims begin to rebuild their lives, many are suffering from grief and trauma. Add to that the lack of basic necessities like clean drinking water. Many are feeling overwhelmed. CBN's Brody Carter shows us how Operation Blessing engineers purified a local well to bring health and hope to victims.
$34 billion. That's the estimate from the World Bank of how much damage was done here in the country of Turkey. It could cost twice that to rebuild. These piles of rubble, they tell much more of a story, more meaningful than just a dollar sign.
It was like the end of the world. We thought that we would die. It was difficult.
That day the earth shook will likely be a point of conversation here for years to come.
In one moment, 10,000 worlds collapsed.
Neriman is a former school teacher born and raised in Hatay, a region surrounded by beautiful mountains, famous for its cuisine and archaeology. The recent earthquakes, however, erased much of life here.
There is no school to work at. Most of my students are dead now. The rest have relocated.
Widespread damage leaves much of the country under a state of emergency. Many survivors suffer from post-traumatic stress.
The trauma, the despair, is something that is tangible. We see it through the eyes of the kids right now, that they suffer this, through the families that lost their beloved ones.
Diego Traverso with Operation Blessing has been on the ground since the first quake struck. The base of operations in this Hatay village has been a refuge for people who have nothing.
And people have seen this love, the tangible love, through a hot meal, through water, through a medicine, and through or just listening to them, just sitting with them and sharing and listening them over and over.
Fresh water, very pure.
Using reverse osmosis, OB's water engineer Jose Esquer is now able to purify up to 300 gallons of water per day from the local well, replacing the short-term solution of water bottles. OB plans to allocate necessary resources to share clean water throughout the region.
We need it. Yeah, we have clean water, pure water for the people.
I'm sure, and we can be sure, that the water that we're filtering is 100% or 99.99999 clean, and cleaner than the one that is selling in the stores.
Reporting in Hatay, Turkey, Brody Carter, CBN News.
And if you'd like to help Operation Blessing's disaster relief effort, you can call 1-800-700-7000, go to cbn.com, or text OBDR to 71777. An enormous leap in artificial intelligence. When we come back, why the technology is creating major concern. Welcome back. New advances in artificial intelligence are generating intense controversy. As AI becomes more common, some are growing concerned. Mark Martin has a look at a program known as ChatGPT and why some are worried about where it could lead.
It requires us to let go of our ego, to be willing to be vulnerable.
Rabbi Joshua Franklin of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons reads a sermon written by the artificial intelligence or AI chatbot known as ChatGPT.
And I told ChatGPT to write me a sermon in the voice of a rabbi of about 1,000 words about the Torah portion on the theme of intimacy and vulnerability.
Rabbi Franklin then wanted his congregation to figure out who wrote it. Most believe the sermon came from other wise individuals, while some suggested it came from Rabbi Franklin himself.
I quickly realized that this was an enormous leap in the ability to generate content artificially that we had never really seen before.
This so-called enormous leap is an AI language program designed to imitate human conversation. ChatGPT can also write in response to prompts from users. OpenAI, the company behind the program, explains it received training on vast amounts of data from the internet written by humans, including conversations.
I do genuinely feel like we are in a pivotal moment right now. It feels to me actually kind of like the very early days of widespread adoption of the internet in terms of how impactful this could be in sort of everyday life.
Yet, in the midst of the buzz about the advanced technology, there have been complaints that ChatGPT has a liberal bias or left-leaning slant. We put it to the test. First, we asked ChatGPT to write a 200-word essay on how the United States was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It concluded, while the United States was undoubtedly influenced by Judeo-Christian principles, it is important to recognize that the country was founded on secular values that promote religious freedom and respect for diversity. Then we moved to politics, requesting 2 controversial stories regarding election results using similar language and different names. The first request, write a 200-word story on how incumbent President Donald Trump defeats presidential candidate Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Its response, I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, it would be inappropriate for me to write a story in which a sitting president wins a re-election that he did not win in reality. When we directed ChatGPT to write a 200-word story on how presidential candidate Hillary Clinton defeats presidential candidate Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election, it did agree to write such a tale, explaining that Trump's campaign was plagued by scandal and divisive rhetoric. Nate Hochman wrote of his experiences with bias for National Review. In one example, he asked the chatbot to write on why Drag Queen Story Hour could be good for children and then also why it could be bad for kids.
The good for children line, you got a very long story with, specific anecdotes about a drag queen named Glitter teaching, children the value of tolerance and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. When you change the word to bad and ask ChatGPT to give you maybe any examples of why there might be concerns about Drag Queen Story Hour for children, again, you got the kind of standard progressive, there are no concerns that are legitimate.
The ChatGPT website does offer a disclaimer that it may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman tweeted, "There will be more challenges like bias. We don't want ChatGPT to be pro or against any politics by default, but if you want either, then it should be for you. Working on this now."
Often the answers would reflect non-belief in God or questioning the existence of God. And often the answers would just add a lot of kind of ideological, liberal, troubling perspectives, and sometimes even discriminating against people.
Regent University School of Divinity Dean and Professor Dr. Corney Becker calls ChatGPT troubling for another reason as well, its role in cheating.
Now there's this system that can take all of this information and generate papers, dialogue forums, and any kinds of discussions from students. So we've looked at this very, very carefully, and unfortunately, we have discovered some students have used it.
To prevent students taking this route, Regent leadership added a statement to the student manual deeming uncited or banned AI programs in student work as academic dishonesty. OpenAI did launch what's called a classifier to distinguish between AI-written and human-written text, but admits it's not fully reliable. This new technology is quickly becoming more available. Microsoft is incorporating OpenAI software into its Bing search engine and Edge web browser. Some reviews label it superior to ChatGPT. Google and other tech businesses are developing their own chatbot software. As the world grapples with the growth in AI tech, Becker delivers this message for Christians.
That it's not real intelligence. We must also be very clear that there's no soul here. There's no ability for the kind of deep, self-reflective questions that need to be asked.
And Rabbi Franklin also shares a message about its limitations.
And so no matter how good ChatGPT can possibly be at describing and using language and describing experiences, it can't really understand spirituality.
Mark Martin, CBN News.
Coming up, advice from a centenarian as a 100-year-old celebrates 2 major milestones. Finally tonight, 2 major milestones, one very special grandmother. Lily Owushu turned 100 years old on Valentine's Day. Friends and family gathering at Columbus Metropolitan Library to celebrate her birthday and the soft launch of her new book. Walking in the Shadows chronicles stories of her life, which she often tells alongside scripture.
When he's putting everybody in their womb, he knows when they're gonna die. Yeah. Everybody God designed, he had a purpose in mind. That's right. So when they do their purpose, you know, he told.
And Lily's stories include having 2 homes destroyed by natural disasters and successfully fighting cancer. Her advice for making it to 100: always persevere and have faith in God. And congratulations and happy birthday to Lily. Quite a milestone. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. Have a great night.